Level 0. Your skin crawls, not because something touched you, but because of what you're looking at. A lotus seed pod? A honeycomb? The cluster of holes on a sponge? Your rational brain knows there's no danger here, but your body reacts anyway. Heart racing, palms sweating, an overwhelming urge to look away, yet somehow you can't stop staring. Welcome to trypophobia, the fear of clustered holes or bumps, and it's far more common than you might think. Here's what makes trypophobia so unsettling. It doesn't require actual danger, no threat, no traumatic memories, just patterns. Scientists believe this response might be evolutionary, warning us away from disease, parasites, venomous creatures. Your brain sees those clusters and hits the panic button before your conscious mind even processes what you're seeing. Studies show that up to 15% of people experience some level of trypophobic response. Unlike many phobias, this one doesn't necessarily stem from a single traumatic event. It's wired deeper, possibly into our DNA itself. The physical symptoms are real: nausea, itching sensation. Some describe feeling like their skin is moving, crawling with invisible insects. What's fascinating is how specific the trigger is. Not all holes bother trypophobes, but cluster them together in an organic, irregular pattern, and suddenly the brain registers threat. It's the density, the repetition, the almost biological quality that triggers the response. But trypophobia is just the surface, a fear that makes you uncomfortable but rarely disrupts your entire life. Because some phobias don't just make you cringe at a photograph, they lock you inside your own home, terrified of the world beyond your door. Level 1. Your hand touches the doorknob. Your chest tightens. The grocery store 2 blocks away might as well be on another planet because the distance between your door and that destination contains 1,000 ways to be trapped, exposed, helpless. This is agoraphobia, and it doesn't just limit your life, it erases it. Agoraphobia isn't simply fear of open spaces, it's the terror of being anywhere escape might be difficult or humiliating if panic strikes. Crowded stores, empty parking lots, bridges. The condition typically develops alongside panic disorder. A person experiences a devastating panic attack in a specific location, and their brain files that environment as lethal. Statistics reveal 2% of adults develop agoraphobia, with women twice as likely as men. The progression is insidious. What starts as avoiding one trigger expands until entire categories of places become impassable. Eventually, some people become completely housebound, unable to retrieve their own mail without experiencing full-body terror. The physical symptoms are severe: racing heart, hyperventilation, dizziness so intense you grab walls to stay upright. Treatment exists. Cognitive behavioral therapy and exposure therapy show strong success rates, but recovery requires confronting the exact situations your brain classifies as unsurvivable. Imagine forcing yourself into a crowded mall when every instinct screams to flee. What makes agoraphobia cruel is how it steals normalcy. Job opportunities vanish, relationships deteriorate. A friend's wedding becomes an impossible obstacle. You become a prisoner, and the warden is your own nervous system. But at least with agoraphobia, you can identify what you're avoiding. Specific places, situations. What happens when the phobia isn't about where you are, but about who's watching? When every human interaction becomes a performance where the penalty for failure is total annihilation of your self-worth. Level 2. Every eye in the room is on you. Every word you speak is being judged, dissected, filed away as evidence of your inadequacy. Your voice shakes, your hands tremble. Sweat soaks through your shirt, and now they can see that too. Physical proof that you're falling apart. This is social anxiety disorder, and it affects 12% of people at some point in their lives. It's not shyness. It's the bone-deep conviction that you are being evaluated and found wanting every single time. People with social anxiety disorder experience terror in situations involving observation or evaluation. Job interviews, public speaking, even eating in front of others. The physical symptoms create a vicious cycle. Blushing, sweating, voice trembling. These visible signs of anxiety become proof that others have noticed your fear, which intensifies the fear. Social anxiety disorder often begins in adolescence. A single humiliating moment can cement as evidence that social situations equal danger. The avoidance patterns reshape entire lives. People refuse promotions requiring public speaking. They avoid dating because vulnerability feels unbearable. Career potential evaporates. Romantic possibilities vanish. What's particularly insidious is how the disorder masquerades as personality. Others assume the sufferer is quiet, introverted, and prefers solitude. But inside, there's often desperate longing for connection. The disorder doesn't eliminate the desire for human contact. It just makes pursuing it feel like walking into a firing squad. And if social anxiety feels like drowning in an ocean of judgment, imagine condensing all that terror into one single, specific target. No complexity required, just 8 legs. And suddenly, your entire world stops. Level 3. It's in the corner. 8 legs, multiple eyes, silent. Your heart rate doubles instantly, your pupils dilate. Every muscle tenses for flight, even though logically you know a house spider poses zero threat. But logic is irrelevant when arachnophobia takes control, and it controls 3 to 6% of the global population with absolute authority. From an evolutionary standpoint, spider fear makes sense. Some spiders kill, venomous bites, necrotic wounds. Ancestors who treated spiders with caution survived. The problem is your ancient alarm system can't distinguish between a deadly funnel web spider and a harmless house spider. The reactions can be extreme. Spotting a spider causes immediate panic, screaming, fleeing. Some people compulsively check corners, under furniture, inside shoes, living in constant vigilance. What makes arachnophobia particularly difficult is ubiquity. Spiders exist everywhere. The anxiety never fully dissipates. Studies show women develop arachnophobia more frequently than men. The fear often begins in childhood. A surprise encounter, a parent's panicked reaction, a terrifying movie. The brain stores the experience as proof that spiders equal mortal danger. Treatment involves exposure therapy, starting with pictures, progressing to videos, eventually being in the same room as a spider. Some programs culminate with touching a tarantula, proving the brain's catastrophic predictions are wrong. But arachnophobia is concrete, visible. You can see what terrifies you. What happens when the phobia has no shape? When the fear targets something so inevitable, so universal that no amount of avoidance changes the outcome? What if you're afraid of the one thing no one escapes? Level 4. Everyone dies. It's the only guarantee. And for most people, that truth sits quietly in the background, acknowledged but not obsessed over. But for people with thanatophobia, mortality isn't background noise. It's a deafening roar that drowns out everything else. The fear of death or dying consumes every quiet moment, every decision, every attempt at peace. People with thanatophobia suffer intrusive, uncontrollable thoughts. What happens after? Will there be pain? The questions spiral endlessly, and no answer provides comfort because the ultimate unknown cannot be solved with logic. The physical symptoms are severe: panic attacks, insomnia, heart palpitations that the person immediately interprets as cardiac arrest beginning, avoidance of anything remotely associated with death, hospitals, funerals, conversations about aging. Some become hypervigilant about health, transforming every minor symptom into terminal illness. Thanatophobia often overlaps with health anxiety. Fear of death leads to obsessive health monitoring. Every test that comes back normal provides only minutes of relief before the next worry emerges. What makes thanatophobia particularly tormenting is its philosophical weight. Afraid of spiders? Avoid spiders. Afraid of death? There is no avoiding death. It's coming regardless. Therapy focuses on acceptance. Cognitive behavioral therapy addresses distorted thoughts. Mindfulness anchors people in the present. Existential therapy explores meaning and purpose despite life's temporary nature. But thanatophobia still concerns something external, something that will happen to you. What happens when the phobia turns inward? When the terror isn't about what might happen, but about what your own body might do? Something you can't control and can't escape because you live inside it. Level 5. Nausea. Your stomach shifts. Instantly, your entire body goes into crisis mode. Heart racing, hands shaking, mind screaming, not this, anything but this. For people with emetophobia, the fear of vomiting, that moment of nausea isn't mild discomfort. It's the single most terrifying thing they can imagine. Worse than injury, worse than pain, worse than almost anything. Emetophobia affects 6 to 7% of women and 1 to 3% of men. What makes it cruel is how it restructures entire lives around avoidance. People develop elaborate safety behaviors. They restrict diets to the same bland foods daily. They avoid alcohol completely. They refuse restaurant food. They stay away from sick people. Pregnancy becomes a nightmare scenario. Morning sickness is the phobia's worst-case scenario, manifesting daily for months. Some women avoid pregnancy entirely despite desperately wanting children. Physical anxiety creates cruel irony. Fear triggers nausea. The brain's stress response includes digestive upset. So, the more afraid someone is of vomiting, the more likely they are to feel nauseated, which intensifies the fear. It's a feedback loop with no obvious exit. Many sufferers would rather experience broken bones, severe pain, even serious illness than vomit. For children with emetophobia, school becomes impossible. Stomach bugs spread in classrooms. The fear leads to school refusal, panic attacks during class, social isolation. Treatment is challenging because exposure therapy is complicated. Therapists can't ethically induce vomiting repeatedly. Instead, treatment uses gradual desensitization with videos, sounds, discussions. Cognitive restructuring challenges catastrophic beliefs about what vomiting actually means. But emetophobia, as overwhelming as it is, still involves a bodily function that happens and passes. What happens when the phobia is about spaces themselves? When walls feel like they're closing in and you're trapped with no escape and the air itself feels like it's running out? Level 6. The elevator doors close. The walls immediately feel closer. Your breath quickens. Sweat forms instantly. Your rational brain knows the elevator is safe, knows you'll reach your floor in 30 seconds, but rationality abandoned you the moment those doors sealed shut. All that remains is primal panic. The certainty that these walls are crushing inward, that you're trapped, that you're suffocating. This is claustrophobia, affecting 12% of people, and for them small spaces aren't uncomfortable. They're unbearable. Claustrophobia manifests in countless ways: elevators, small rooms, cars, airplanes, MRI machines. The core fear remains consistent: being trapped, unable to escape, helpless. The physical response is immediate and overwhelming: hyperventilation, dizziness, chest pain, the sensation of suffocating even though oxygen is plentiful. Evolutionary psychologists link claustrophobia to ancestral survival. Being trapped in collapsed caves or predator dens meant death. One of the most challenging aspects is how modern life demands interaction with small spaces. Medical procedures requiring MRI scans become ordeals requiring sedation. Flying turns into hours of white-knuckled terror. People develop sophisticated avoidance, always taking stairs, even in 20-story buildings, arriving early to secure seats near exit. The fear often traces to traumatic experiences: being locked in a closet as a child, getting stuck in an elevator, treatment centers on exposure therapy, gradually progressing to more challenging enclosed spaces. Virtual reality allows experiencing simulated small spaces without actual risk. At least claustrophobia involves external spaces you can physically leave. But what happens when the fear isn't about where you are, but about invisible contamination on every surface, germs and illness lurking everywhere, turning the entire world into a minefield of microscopic threats you can never fully eliminate? Level 7. Every doorknob harbors invisible killers. Every handshake is a potential infection. Every surface you touch might transfer pathogens that will invade your body and destroy you from within. For people with mysophobia, germophobia, the fear of contamination isn't a minor concern. It's an exhausting, all-consuming war against an enemy that exists everywhere and can never be completely defeated. Mysophobia often overlaps with obsessive-compulsive disorder. The core fear is contamination: germs, bacteria, viruses. And because germs are microscopic and omnipresent, the fear has no boundary. People with severe mysophobia engage in extreme rituals. Hand-washing continues until skin cracks and bleeds. Cleaning surfaces multiple times with industrial-strength disinfectants. Refusing to touch public doors, railings, elevator buttons. Some wear gloves constantly. Others avoid leaving homes entirely. The compulsions provide temporary relief but reinforce the phobia long-term. Each ritual becomes evidence of threat, creating cycles where fear and response feed each other endlessly. Social consequences are devastating. Mysophobia destroys relationships. Imagine refusing to hug family members because you fear their germs. Being unable to be intimate with a partner because bodily contact feels contaminated. The phobia intensified globally during COVID. For people with pre-existing mysophobia, the pandemic confirmed their worst fears, and when restrictions were lifted, people with mysophobia remained trapped in heightened fear states. Treatment requires careful balance. Exposure and response prevention therapy is effective but brutal. The person is gradually exposed to feared contaminants and prevented from engaging in compulsive rituals. Over time, the brain learns contamination doesn't lead to catastrophe. At least mysophobia has a logical foundation. Germs do exist. Illness does spread. The fear is exaggerated but not baseless. But what happens when the brain creates terror from the terror itself? When you become afraid of your own fear, trapping yourself in an infinite loop where escape is logically impossible? Level 8. Fear of fear itself. It sounds like a philosophical paradox, but phobophobia is devastatingly real. It's the terror of experiencing terror, the dread of panic attacks, the horror of that out-of-control feeling when anxiety hijacks your nervous system, and it creates the cruelest trap imaginable. Fearing fear guarantees you'll experience. Phobophobia typically develops after someone experiences intense panic attacks. Once it passes, a new fear plants itself. What if it happens again? That question becomes phobophobia's seed. The person starts monitoring their body constantly. Is my heart beating too fast? This hypervigilance detects every minor fluctuation. A slightly elevated heart rate from climbing stairs becomes evidence another panic attack is starting. The fear of the panic attack triggers the panic attack. The avoidance patterns become absurdly broad. People avoid anything potentially triggering anxiety: stressful situations, exciting events, even positive experiences. Imagine turning down a job promotion because success feels too overwhelming. What makes phobophobia insidious is self-perpetuation. Fear creates physiological arousal. Arousal triggers fear. Fear increases arousal. The loop accelerates until the person is having a full panic attack about the possibility of having a panic attack. It's a snake devouring its own tail. Therapy for phobophobia is uniquely challenging. Standard exposure therapy involves confronting feared stimuli, but how do you expose someone to fear itself? Therapists use interoceptive exposure, deliberately inducing physical sensations associated with panic, spinning to create dizziness, hyperventilating to trigger breathlessness. Recovery requires accepting discomfort rather than eliminating it. The person must learn that anxiety isn't an emergency. Panic attacks won't kill them. Fear is temporary, not permanent. And if phobophobia represents fear consuming itself from within, there exists one condition even more comprehensive, one phobia. So totalizing it doesn't just limit life, it makes living itself feel impossible. Level 9. Imagine being afraid of everything. Not metaphorically, not as an exaggeration. Literally everything. Every situation, every object, every possibility, every moment. This is panphobia, also called omniphobia, the fear of everything. And it represents the complete annihilation of the brain's threat assessment system. Panphobia isn't having multiple phobias simultaneously. It's a state where fear becomes the default response to existence itself. Waking up triggers anxiety. Being alone triggers anxiety. Being around others triggers anxiety. Eating, not eating, silence, noise, light, darkness. Every stimulus filters through overwhelming dread. The condition is extremely rare and poorly understood. People who experience it describe something beyond general anxiety. It's terror without object, fear that needs no stimulus because it generates itself constantly from nothing. People with panphobia can become completely non-functional. Leaving bed feels impossible, even thoughts become threatening. The mind turns on itself, generating catastrophic scenarios about everything. What if I stop breathing? What if gravity stops working? The questions grow increasingly abstract, completely untethered from actual danger. Treatment is extraordinarily difficult. Traditional exposure therapy requires identifying specific fears. But when everything is feared, where do you start? Medication can reduce symptom severity, but rarely eliminates the condition. Some cases emerge from severe trauma. A person experiences such overwhelming threat that their brain's fear system shatters. Recalibrating everything is dangerous. The isolation is absolute. How do you explain you're afraid of everything? Relationships become impossible, employment vanishes, independence dissolves. The person becomes entirely dependent while simultaneously terrified of that dependence. Recovery, when it happens, is slow and fragile. It requires rebuilding the brain's ability to distinguish actual threats from false alarm. Scientists speculate that panphobia may represent extreme dysregulation of the amygdala and fear processing networks in the brain. But here's what researchers haven't answered yet. What happens when panphobia reaches its absolute endpoint? When every sensory input, every thought, every heartbeat registers as an existential threat. There are documented cases, rare and disturbing, where patients report something beyond even panphobia, a state where the fear stops being about specific stimuli entirely and becomes something else, something they can't explain, something that doesn't fit into any diagnostic category because the experience transcends what we understand fear to be. These patients describe it differently, not as fear of everything, but as fear that exists without them, as if the terror has separated from their consciousness and become an independent entity. Medical literature contains only fragments, case studies that end abruptly, patients who stopped communicating entirely, not because they became catatonic, but because language itself became another source of incomprehensible dread. And those cases, the ones that go beyond panphobia into territory we don't have names for yet, they're still being studied, still locked away in research facilities, still trying to explain to doctors what it feels like when fear stops being something you experience and becomes something you are. The files remain open. The questions are unanswered, because maybe we haven't reached the final level yet.